Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on what time you're watching this video. My name is Evelyn Espinoza, and today I will be examining foreclosures as a form of expulsion. So just to recap, what is expulsion? Where does it come from? Why is it important that we have a term such as expulsion? This term was coined by Dr. Saskia Sassen, who has her PhD in sociology and economics. In 1991, she published a book titled The Global City, which she examined the evolution of metropolitan cities, which have become these hubs for the global economy. Upon doing this research, she realized that these global cities are centered within the global economy. They're these systemic centers, and beyond that, she started to become interested in what kind of hides in the penumbra of these global cities, what's in the shadow, what's beyond these. So in exploring there, to no one's surprise, she found inequalities. She has mentioned in a lecture that inequalities have always existed. So long as there are complex systems, you've got inequalities. However, with deregulation, multinational corporations, globalization, you do have something brand new that Dr. Sassen, she found that under extreme circumstances, there are people and conditions such as land and water that are being expelled from our operational spaces. It's almost invincible. She saw that inequality became an insufficient term, almost a lazy term to describe these situations. For example, like when thinking of inequalities, we are continuously searching for equitable solutions, thinking like, oh, let's just send more resources there. However, what happens when you are no longer even considered in terms of trying to find a solution? An example that Dr. Amarino presented was unemployment. Let's say the U.S. has this large unemployment list. They're focusing on developing new jobs and trying to shorten that list, and all of a sudden it is shortened. They're like, wow, look, we're doing so great. We don't have as much our unemployment rates are down. However, if you actually look at the individuals that were on this list, let's say there is Juan, who had been unemployed. He had a decent paying job where he can support his family. However, he was unemployed so long that he no longer had much of a choice but to get 3 jobs paying minimum wage, where he is exhausted. And it sets him in kind of this cycle of set in poverty where no one's looking to help him, because according to the official data, he has a job, he is employed, he is doing great, he's part of the economy. When in reality, there is this expulsion that has occurred. Dr. Sassen looks to expand the term expulsion and apply it on a global scale. So in doing so, she tries to guide us into understanding this by using a binary division of a global north and global south. I would argue that she's almost kind of creating a new order that includes and connects these expulsions happening around the world. I know I neither have the time nor the knowledge to be able to talk in depth about all the expulsions that Dr. Sassen covered in her book. So rather, I'll be focusing on an expulsion in the global north, which are foreclosures. As the film Inside Job pointed out, the lead up to the financial crisis of 2008 was in part due to continued deregulation, as well as the financialization of the housing market. The film, as well as the Chapter 3, Finance and its Capabilities, go in depth and do an excellent job of explaining the lead up to the financial crisis, the impact of all the foreclosures and kind of like the stark numbers, as well as peeling back different layers, how there are certain communities that were more disadvantaged in terms of this, like the high rates of the subprime, the predatory lending towards the Black community, as well as the Latino community. So for the sake of this presentation, I actually want to focus on what does this stagnant state look like? What does it look like when one is brutally ripped from the fabric of society in terms of being able to participate in social mobility? What does that look like? How let's explore that space a little bit. As the film briefly mentioned, one of the types of expulsions faced due to foreclosures is homelessness, where there is a literal expulsion of society, where you aren't counted. Think of the census, which occurred during this period as well, the 2010. It's incredibly difficult to have an accurate count of the homeless population. But just to dig in a little bit further, there are three methods that can be used. There is the indirect method, single contact censuses, and capture-recapture studies. Indirect method that depends on key informants. It's like if I was say if I worked for the census, and I went beep, called up the soup kitchen. I was like, hey, what are the numbers of homeless people that frequent this location? I would get in contact with homeless shelters as well. Together, this is the most economical solution. However, sometimes they do overcount, and there are no specific identifiers, which are very important to get specific demographics when it comes to the census and the distribution of resources. So the second is single contact censuses, and that one is when you think of census, you usually think of enumerators knocking on doors, doing the interview as well. So that's what that is. It provides for direct contact. Demographics are obtained, so it has more specifics. However, the disadvantage is the census only provides a cross-sectional view of a single point in time. With the increasing and decreasing population of homelessness, it becomes impossible to get an overall picture. There is one method that does use a statistical model to estimate the size of the unseen portion of the population, and that is their capture-recapture studies. However, upon looking at the methods that the census used in both 2010 and 2020, they only used indirect method as well as a single contact census. I think the Census Bureau had put out this press release on their official website, and I think this summarizes the point that I'm trying to make much better than I could. So it goes, quote, "The Census Bureau does not provide or publish a total count of the homeless population. Further, it is important to recognize that there is no standard or agreed upon definition of what constitutes homelessness. Also, people experiencing homelessness can be counted and included in the census through various operations, but those operations do not separately identify or even collect information or separately identify people who might be experiencing homelessness." Now, although it may be a bit easier to identify forms of expulsion in terms of the homeless population, because you're like, oh yeah, these people are literally kind of out of society, and it's difficult to get a job. It's difficult. It comes with its own set of difficulties that keeps you in a certain cycle. It's difficult to get out of. However, what about the people that did manage to get a roof over their head? What about the people that went from being homeowners to being renters? Where do they fit in terms of the expulsion? Where do they fit in terms of the stagnant space? Once again, pulling a quote in terms of the lingering effects of the financial crisis. What it does, it impairs people's credit scores. It has a foreclosure. This creates an obstacle in any time that they want to possibly borrow money or pull out another mortgage. Or it also affects their employment, their chances of employment, and it also makes it increasingly difficult to actually rent an apartment. A lot of the apartment buildings, what they do is, no matter how much money you're making, no matter how your credit score may be, if within the last 7 years you have an eviction foreclosure, then it's an automatic denial. I myself have worked in a couple of different locations, and that was always the case. Unfortunately, there was nothing that the individual could do. So now just kind of think about this. Think about all the different apartment buildings, and you have all these people who didn't have a place to live. Now, the number of possible locations where they could move to decreases significantly by having foreclosures on their record. So right here is a graph that shows the U.S. home foreclosures between 2006 and 2010. As you can see, these are really big numbers. These are numbers in the millions, and this is only in the U.S. It doesn't account for anything in Iceland, over there in the U.K. and Spain, no other countries, even though they were impacted as well. As Dr. Sasson points out, there is a certain desensitization that occurs, this dehumanizing aspect where these are a lot of numbers, and sometimes people don't want to think about them. They're like, well, that's just happening to a lot. So in this presentation, I kind of want to bring it back down to a singular level rather than looking at all of these numbers. So the year 2008, right here, we see that there are 3.1 million foreclosure notices. My family actually happened to be one of those recipients of these notices. So the year was 2008, and with the economy crashing, my parents, they had a small business that all of a sudden the income just stopped flowing in. no one can really afford. People were losing their homes. People were struggling to find housing. Had all this going on. The banks had mentioned like, hey, maybe we can help you out. They'd called. They're like, hey, well, we can reduce it by $100. However, if you can't really afford the mortgage, how are you going to be able to? Like, that's not actually much help. So then from there, we ended up moving we downsized into a small home where we managed to be able to pay the rent right there, as well as pay the rent for my parents' business location, the office. However, after a year, it became unsustainable because, once again, there was no increase in funds. There was no increase in capital. Everyone was kind of broke, and everyone was struggling, and everyone had their own thing going on. So after the year, my parents made the decision: we either keep paying rents right here in this house, or we move to the office. So it became an easy decision when you think about the fact that the office is going to generate future income, and the house is only going to act as a roof over our head. It really just came down to that. So the office, we converted into a furniture store where we had beds set up. My parents had a bedroom in separate, like an office room. There was a little warehouse in the back where we created this faux closet by layering boxes, and we also created a faux kitchen by layering boxes right there. Had the electric stove and everything. In the bathroom in the back, we managed to build a shower right there. However, it was important to shower before 5 a.m. because that is when the neighbors showed up. They don't want them to think there was a leak going on in the neighbor's place, the neighbor's office. So we made it work. However, post 2008, our housing situation, as I mentioned, it became unstable. Between the years 2008 and 2012, we had moved a total of 4 different times from place to place to place, just kind of trying to find somewhere stable. And finally, actually in the year 2012, we moved into the home that we are still renting to this day. So one might think, wow, somewhere stable, somewhere that you're good, you're staying right there. However, how does this actually tie towards the expulsion? So I'm only going to use the example of the house that we've been living in for the past 10 years. So as renters, one could think, well, it's already been the post 7 years. You guys can apply for a new mortgage. You guys can pay for a house. As a renter, you're paying a large portion of your income towards rent that is not going towards the development of the acquisition of generational wealth in terms of building up your equity. So right there in the house, we have been living there for 10 years. So the rent that we've paid has totaled $226,800. If we were a homeowner, that would have been an accumulation of equity, an accumulation of wealth that we can then pass on and we can invest in. So right here, I do have 2 pictures side by side. So I called up my dad and I was like, okay, so what has been stopping us from buying a home? He mentioned if you want a fixed mortgage, we need 20% of the down payment. So in our current home right now, according to Zillow, it is valued at $705,400, which means we would need $151,000 for the down payment. Another way to look at it is, let's say, how about we set aside $100 a month, and eventually, we're gonna build up. Everyone set that aside. But as a renter, instead of having a fixed mortgage, you have the homeowners have the capacity to continuously raise your rent every year. A lot of times that's where the saving goes. I remember myself when I was working in a leasing office and we increased the rent on people. A common comment was, why are you guys raising my rent by this much? I didn't even get this kind of raise at work. This makes no sense. And I'm like, well, what can we do? We want to keep generating the profits. The homeowner wants to keep gaining passive income. So in being a renter, there is this expelling of this generation of capital, which is done through home ownership. And then just to give you an idea of how valuable, what kind of valuable investment this is, here is a graph. The growth of the value on this home within the past 10 years. Since we've moved in, the value on this home has more than doubled the amount. This is just one example. As I mentioned, we are only one family who received a foreclosure notice out of $3.1 million in the year 2008 in the US. Everyone has different stories. I understand that although capitalism kind of messed our situation up, it also allowed us to survive and be able to move forward. Because something that my mom has always taught us: no matter what, you can sell something. You can continue to try to build a business. I remember when we were living in the office, I didn't have any money to buy shoes or clothes or a backpack for school. So we would constantly be dropped off in grocery stores to try to get people's contact information, try to sell them some pots and pans. But as I mentioned, we're only one story out of millions and millions of people that have experienced this. And then beyond that, foreclosure is only one form of expulsion that has occurred. There are many more stories out there in the world. And creating this new map of these new borders that include different forms of expulsion and creating connections between kind of trying to find the systemic resonance between these expulsions. Dr. Sawson, I believe she does an excellent job of, rather than relying on social responsibility, like, oh, we need to go help these people, or rather than relying on the sympathy of others through the use of poverty stereotypes, I guess I'll say, where you're like, have the song "In the Arms of an Angel Fly." You're like, oh my God, these poor people. I'll send $1. I'll send $2. Rather than relying on that, you kind of create a kinship. You create solidarity amongst the people. I know personally myself, I have always loved what I've loved the most about working in groups is the fact that you always have a certain individual all the time in different groups where you're like, wow, how did you come up with that idea? That's so innovative. I never would have thought of that. Now, imagine that on a global scale. Imagine all the people that can be working towards these solutions. So I do think there's hope. Either that or we're doomed and we're just going to watch the casual decline of everything. But so to kind of finish off this presentation, in terms of what is next, I found this discussion that Dr. Sawson had. In terms, she was talking about the expulsions, and then there were other scholars there that were talking about what is the opposite of that, and it was the urban commons. This is kind of an innovative alternative idea. So I'll link it below. You can follow up this video by watching that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good day.